Welcome to Sitcom Showdown, a podcast that reviews classic sitcom episodes and inducts them into our very own Hall of Fame. As usual, one of us has chosen a sitcom episode and the other guy has no idea what it's going to be. Will they already know it? Will they love it? Can they be convinced that it's worthy? Let's find out on Sitcom Showdown.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Sitcom Showdown. It's episode 34. So what have you selected for us tonight?
What I've selected is we're staying in our home country of Australia and we're going back exactly 20 years and we're going to... that's not narrowing it down for you, is it?
No, it's not.
No, okay, we're going to do an episode of The Games.
Ooh, okay, yep.
For the listener who may not have come across The Games before, The Games had two series and it's all about the preparation for the Olympic Games which were held in Sydney in the year 2000. It was, as I said, done in 1998 and it was on the network ABC, which, as people probably know, is the Australian equivalent of the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a government broadcaster. The episode we're going to look at is Series 1, Episode 4, Robbo and the 100 Metres. So each series had 13 episodes. So, you know, that's pretty healthy in terms of episode numbers, I think. Now, I think that was a knowing chuckle, and you know what's going on, roughly speaking, with
I
this
think
episode.
I know what the big gag is behind this episode, but we'll get to that all in good time.
All right, cool. So The Games is a satirical mockumentary. We'll call it that. We might discuss that later. And it follows the team of three people who are the bureaucrats in charge of organising the year 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney, and their department is the fictional Sydney Olympic Organising Committee. And basically it's just them dealing with all the massive amounts of cronyism in the Olympic movement and the incompetence in the New South Wales public service and unethical dealing in politics and the media and prima donna athletes and all these things. So basically these three, they're doing one of the most stressful contract jobs in the world. And they're just surrounded and accosted by all these shysters and hustlers and idealists and jobs worth bureaucrats and all sorts of other crazy things. So that's what they've got to deal with.
It sounds like a handful.
I imagine it would be, and it turns out to be if you watch the whole show.
It's the definition of a hard deadline as well, isn't it?
Oh, it totally is. Yeah.
It's not like you can just push the Olympics back by a few weeks if you happen to be running late on something.
No way. So the characters in The Games, there are four main characters. Before I tell you who they are, though, it's the characters are named the same as the actors. They've taken their own names.
Keeps things simple?
Yes. Well, it does keep things simple.
Not the first time we've had this, is it?
No, definitely not. So they've done this, it says on Wikipedia, to enhance the feel of a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And people in Australia would have already known who they are. But nonetheless, I think it's a nifty thing. And we saw this in the goodies where Graham Garden and Bill Oddie and Tim Brooke Taylor are known in the goodies. But if you're an actor, I assume that it's also got a nice carryover. You know, you're always going to be more recognised, right? So if you see Bill Oddie in the street, you're always going to go, oh, that's Bill from the goodies. Instead, if you're an actor and no one knows your name, and they'll go, you're the guy who played such and such from that show. And, so you're always going to be recognised. It's good for your profile.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll start off with Gina Riley, and she plays the manager of marketing in this trio. So she's had her own sitcom success, Gina Riley, with, what is it, Steve? Kath and Kim.
Oh, Kath and Kim.
You're not a fan of Kath and Kim.
I was never a fan.
Fair enough. But Kath and Kim was massive and it had 4 series and it went on to enormous success. And then the Americans did a version of it, which probably lined her pockets very nicely. So she's a good writer and creator of her own sitcom material. And we all know her before and actually after that as a sketch show stalwart.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes back to 86 on the ABC. But then it went on to the shows Fast Forward and Full Frontal on commercial television, and she's done a few sketch shows in the last 5 years or whatever as well. Next is Brian Dorr. Now, in this show, he plays the guy who handles all the accounts and finance, so he's always going on at John and Gina about, we're going to be in hideous amounts of debt.
Irresponsibility.
We're never going to cover this thing. So Brian Dorr, we know him best as one half of Clark and Dorr, and they used to do these brilliant short satirical interviews with Brian as the interviewer and the other guy in this sitcom, John Clark, as the interviewee.
Hmm.
And again, So John Clark might be playing a certain government minister, but he never puts on a costume or a voice or a wig and all that. They just did it as themselves, and it was the content of the thing that was great. And they were just little 4-minute segments that they used to have on the end of current affairs programs. So they were on the 7:30 report on the ABC, and then they were on a current affair, and then they got their own series on the ABC. But what I didn't know about Brian Dorr is that in the 70s he was somewhat of a bigwig A&R guy in the music biz, and he turned, I think it was Neil Diamond's Hot August Night into a massive success in Australia and things like this. He also wrote a lot of comedy as well, so he wrote for Fast Forward, and he did a ton of stuff on ABC Radio, and he was actually head of the radio comedy unit at ABC for a few years. There you go. Next up is John Clark. Most Australians should know John Clark, damn it, and if they don't, then, you know, they need to be taught a lesson. So he plays the head of administration and logistics. So it basically all comes down to John when stuff goes wrong. He got his start in New Zealand with the Fred Dagg character and movies. Then he became part of what I'm sort of calling the Australian comedy renaissance. And he had a part in The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie.
Okay. Back in the 70s or something, is it?
Yeah, the early 70s. And like Brian Dorr, he had a gig on The Gillies Report, which was an ABC comedy show that was sort of politically clever. And he did those 27 years of sketch interviews with Brian Dorr. But aside from that, he did a bunch of small TV parts and was most recently a regular character in an ABC sitcom called The XPM, starring Sean McAuliffe. Yeah, and it's probably no exaggeration to say he was one of the most respected Australians, even though he was a New Zealander, across any spectrum. But to be an entertainer, you know what I mean? There wouldn't be anyone in the entertainment biz or media or political thing who wouldn't respect John Clark, I would have thought. Not many people you can say that about.
That's true.
Now, the last character is Nicholas Bell. He's not in this episode, but I'll give you a rundown on him anyway. He's a British actor. He started on Dixon of Dock Green as a 4-year-old in the 60s. But he's worked mainly in Australia for the last 25 years or so. He's a very good actor, but he's been in a ton of TV in small roles. He's been in a few movies like Dark City, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Mission Impossible 2, Ned Kelly, Salem's Lot, and all sorts of things that are nothing like this role whatsoever. And he plays the Olympic Minister's secretary in the games, and his job is essentially making John, Gina, and Brian's life an absolute misery. With all his underhanded, slimy bullcrap. And now the other person in this episode as a guest star is a chap called Jim Daly. He's playing Mr. Wilson, who's the builder of the athletics stadium. And Steve, you'll know him from Utopia as the beloved Bert.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I reckon you would have recognised him
good
straight
old
off.
Bert.
Yeah. Let's go away and watch this show, and then we'll come back and comment on it.
No two 100 metres tracks are ever the same. Everybody knows that.
Well, how long is our 100 metres track?
Look, what's the point?
The point, Mr. Wilson, is that in 739 days, we're going to have the Olympic 100 metres final on that track. This is an event that'll be watched by about 600 million of the world's most dedicated rugged individualists. You and I both know it's going to be run on a track that's not 100 metres long.
How do you know that?
Mr. Wilson, do you know who is the current 100 metres all-comers Australian record holder?
No.
The 100 metre record in this country, Mr. Wilson, is currently held by Brian.
Brian?
And you, Mark, Mr. Wilson, set at a blistering session last Wednesday. I wish you'd been there. We were down there and we had a bet.
Is this wind assisted?
No, and we'd had a couple, and in my view, Brian's not in quite the nick he was at the same stage of last season.
So you've measured the track?
Yeah, we've measured the track, Mr. Wilson. How long is it, Mr. Wilson?
You know how long it is?
I want to hear you say it.
94 metres.
94 metres.
All right, we just watched the games, Robbo and the 100 metres track, and a couple of things to clear up before we move on with the synopsis, Steve. And one, which is you very rightly pointed out, that I hadn't talked about the actor who plays Robbo. Robbo, who is the he's the Sydney Olympics Supremo. So he's just an interface. It's all very complex how Gina and John and Brian blend in with the IOC and the government and Robbo and all these things. So let's not even go into all of that. And the other thing was the background to watching, which we often talk about. Now, I just watched this as it came out in 1998 on the ABC. Was it similar with you, or can you not remember?
I don't think I did watch this when it was on.
Oh.
In fact, I don't think I've watched more than 1 or 2 episodes of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you. Oh, well. I'll lend
I've
you the
definitely
DVDs.
seen this one before.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. And that's part of the reason I selected it, because as we've discussed before, one of my big selecting methods is go, here's such and such a sitcom, which is the most memorable episode, and I start there.
Yep.
Anyway, let's get into the synopsis.
Oh, before we do,
Yeah,
is this a mockumentary?
I'd say it is, yeah. When we did Utopia, they don't talk to the camera, so it wasn't a mockumentary and it was a satire, and I got a bit confused.
Yep.
Whereas in this one...
I think I did too.
Oh,
to
good.
be fair.
I won't take all the blame then. So in this one, the characters are very often talking directly to the camera. And in fact, in some ways, I'd argue they do it as much as, if not just a tad more than The Office, where, you know, people have big monologues direct to the camera. They certainly acknowledge it as a group and stuff like that.
Yep.
So this episode of the games only takes place in 2 locations, which is quite unusual. So it takes place in the main office of John, Gina and Brian. And it also takes place at a press conference across town by Gary Robertson, Robbo, the federally appointed Olympics Supremo, who was formerly a government minister. So we open in the office where Brian, Gina and John are just having a quick talk directly to the camera on how things are going with selling their memorabilia and tickets and all this sort of stuff.
The mascots.
Now, this has got nothing to do with the plot of the episode, but it's just a nice little introductory teaser to let you know how things are going as they're moving along. And the upshot of it is that they're selling lots and lots of mascot toys to the kiddies, which is encouraging. They're not selling many tickets to adults except for the swimming, which is very popular. And I'll put a quick clip in here.
Far and away, the greatest response we've had from people buying tickets is for the swimming. Australia did very well in the swimming in Atlanta, of course.
It's hard to know. I mean, at the moment, logically, you would have to say that we're selling a lot of tickets to people who perhaps want to go to the previous Olympics and a great amount of product to people who don't know what the Olympics are.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So in this clip, it illustrates what they do, which is they lay out some facts, then they give you a new perspective on those facts that makes a mockery of what various people do. Anyway, so straight away from there, Gina is leaving to go to the press conference by Robbo, the Supremo, and she asks John for some briefing notes on the environmental aspect of the games. And that's what this media session is all about. And so John says, look, over there, you've got a handy brochure which covers all that stuff. So Gina grabs the brochure and she heads off. And that'll be more or less the last we see of her because she's watching the press conference.
It's fair to say that no one's paying too much attention to the fine detail about the environmental stuff.
No. Gina's gone off and she's left Brian and John to meet with Mr. Wilson, the builder, and the very pushy Jasmine Holt. But she's already sort of camped in their meeting room wanting to see them first. And this is another little short segment and we don't see Jasmine again in this episode. She's the marketing person from the federal government and apparently a relative of the minister. So she's just one of these people they've given a job to who comes up with wacko things. And so the team is sort of obliged to hear her suggestions, which in this meeting include bringing the games into the new millennium in the year 2000 by cutting out such dead wood as the Olympic oath, the medals, because round medals are too cliche, so they want to bring in some, I don't know what she's suggesting. And she wants to change the release of doves on their flight of peace because it's not Australian enough. They need it more Aussie, so she suggests emus.
Release the emus.
Release the emus. So anyway, they thank Jasmine for her suggestions and they sort of usher her out so they can talk to Mr. Wilson. So this Mr. Wilson thing, as I turn my page of notes, it's from this point a 4-minute conversation. And it's just brilliant. And I like to think they've remembered all the lines rather than cut. But anyway, we'll find out. So there's a little problemo, as Mr. Wilson, the builder, puts it.
Bit of a snafu.
Totally. And it ends in an admission from Mr. Wilson that the 100 metres track in the beautiful stadium that their office looks down on is in fact only 94 metres long. So our dear listener heard that in the clip.
Yep.
Yeah. So we cut to Gina, who's rushing into the press conference, and she hands the brochure to Robbo's assistant. And Robbo's assistant, she takes it out and puts it on the big press conference table with all the microphones for Robbo to refer to. He hasn't read it beforehand.
No.
And we quickly cut back to John, Brian, and Mr. Wilson sort of trying to hash out a solution for the shortage of track. But they get the word that through a phone call, and they're saying the press conference has started. So John turns on the TV so they can all watch Robbo's press conference. Anyway, at this point, we're 10 minutes into the episode, right? And the remaining 15 minutes are just cutting solely back and forth between the press conference and Brian and John hassling Mr. Wilson, and they brainstorming a solution, and it just cuts back and forth. So that's pretty much the whole episode, but I'll quickly run you through some things. Robbo reads the brochure, which is from the recently held Nagano Winter Games, it turns out, and it looks like becoming a complete stuff-up because he's quoting facts from the other Olympics. And his assistant whispers something to him from the sidelines, a stage whisper. And he really saves the day, Robbo does, just using bluff and quick thinking and a cool head. And so this illustrates that he's really good at what he does.
Yep.
And people are going, oh, he's good, this bloke. Anyway, so Robbo, throughout the rest of the episode, takes awkward questions on not using recycled water in the Olympic Village, which has a little Chinese whispers thing. So his assistant's whispering facts to him, saying, the Hindus refuse to drink recycled water. The Indians won't drink it. And Robbo mishears it and says to the press, West Indians want trinkets. The Hindus won't touch recycled water. The Zulus won't torch it. Just ridiculous stuff.
When the press question him on this, he's just like, yeah, that's right. So what?
Yeah, my hands are tied. What can I do?
What do you want?
And he just bluffs straight through it.
Yeah.
He takes questions on Sydney having a pollution problem. And his response to that is gold. The endangered green and gold bell frog is apparently in danger from Olympic construction out at Homebush, and he takes questions on that. Yes. Anyway, we've got another clip here for people.
Yeah, the green and gold bell frog, which is native to the Homebush area, is on the endangered species list. There was talk at one stage of it being added to the list of Olympic mascots.
No, Paul, I think I can say without fear of serious contradiction that the endangered green and gold bell frog will not be added to the ongoing list of Olympic mascots for the very simple reason.
Why not?
Well, because, Paul, if you'd been doing your reading, you would have noticed that the green and gold bell frog has been removed from the official endangered species list, a fact that was announced at a ceremony last week on the shores of Homebush Bay.
Who was there?
Oh, everyone was there, Paul. Yeah, people from the Environment Department, the Minister, Wildlife and Fisheries Department, Soil Erosion Authorities, and representatives of the major green organisations.
Were the frogs there?
No, the frogs weren't there, Paul. We didn't send them an invitation. We assumed, obviously erroneously, that frogs can't read.
Robbo, the World Wildlife Fund and other green groups that were excluded from the ceremony have suggested the reason the frogs weren't there is that the frog is in fact now extinct.
Well, either way, they're off the endangered list.
So another question he gets asked is, how do you address the fact that there's not enough women in the Sydney Games organising committee, which doesn't meet the Greenpeace guidelines and so on and so on. So it's basically good sequences of him having to answer these embarrassing questions and Robbo just destroying these poor media people, which wouldn't happen in today's society, of course, because it'd be all over Twitter. But this is pre-Twitter when, people had to actually write a letter to complain. So meanwhile, Mr. Wilson, Brian and John are still brainstorming solutions to the 94-metre track, which include taking out the first 3 rows, which isn't the first 3 rows, but the back 3 rows.
That had me scratching my head a bit, but
yeah,
we got there in the end.
Adding 6 metres to the 200-metre event, and so you've got to make the 100, 200 double compulsory, so it averages out to the exact 300 metres. You could have a new event altogether, the 94 metres. And Brian suggests a circular 100-metre track in the centre of the existing 400-metre track, which has its own good response, which I might play for you later. So as mentioned, this is all wrapped up by Robbo directing any questions. He says the day-to-day happenings at Homebush are the direct responsibility of Kevin Nowra from my office. So direct your questions to him. He has my full support. which we get told in political and media terms that means he's gone, he's a sacrificial lamb, and they're going to pin everything on him. And they're watching this, Brian and John and Mr. Wilson, and then they're saying, I hope the press doesn't get hold of anything to do with the 94-metre track, at which point a journalist rings up, says, look, I hear there's a problem with the length of the 100-metre track. But apparently we're told that there's a chap in Robbo's office called Kevin Nowra who's responsible for this sort of thing. Have you got any comment? And John just tells the journalist, Kevin Nowra has our full support. And that's the end of the episode.
Yep.
So we could start with fave gags and one-liners. But as usual, before we do that, Steve,
right,
I want to overthink it and give you a bit of a theory. So I think with the games, it's really difficult to do fave gags and one-liners because when it comes to the games, a lot of the humour is in the logic and the linguistics, right? So it mixes up a lot of laconic Aussie style with ultra-sharp observation and wit. And that what they do can't be compressed into 1 or 2 lines. So in the instance of the 100-metre track first conversation, that's 4 minutes, right? And it has this huge payoff at the end. And the final lines, which are awesome, and there's awesome lines throughout, they draw their power from the whole of the conversation beforehand. So you can't just go, some of my favourite lines are. And we're going to have to use a lot of clips in this episode of the podcast. But anyway, some candidates are, and I've mentioned twice the Hello Dead Builder Proprietary Limited. That's a good one.
It reminded me a bit of Faulty Towers. Remember, Mr. O'Reilly puts up
Yeah,
the
the
wall in the
builder.
wrong place and Sybil's about to slit his throat.
Oh, that's right,
bit
because
out.
she forbade Basil from using
it.
All right.
But he's cheap.
Yeah, maybe I should let you put out your lines because I've got a feeling some of mine are going to overlap.
Oh, okay. Oh, I like the bit where they're about to sit down and have this meeting with the builder, but first they've got to suffer through the meeting with the marketing lady, and just the way that John walks into the room, before he gets to the table where they're sitting down with her, he basically puts all his notepad and everything else off to one side. So he sits down with no notepad or anything like that. So it's obvious that he's got no intention of
noting down anything.
Anything that she says.
Ah.
And then he calls out to his PA or something like that. No calls for 5 minutes. And he looks at her, have you got the message? This is over in 5 minutes.
I didn't pick up on any of that. Well done on seeing all those little subtle things.
I like the way they refer to Mr. Wilson by his surname throughout the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because in one way they're being very businesslike and formal with him, but at the same time they're basically almost like mates sitting around almost as if they were at the pub trying to solve this problem of the 100-metre track being 6 metres too short.
That's right, and they're putting their feet up on the ledge and they're always smiling even though they're probably ready to throttle him.
Yep, exactly. I like the gag where they say, we've got to get this sorted out because we've got a school championship here next week and someone's going to break
a world
set
record.
a new world record.
Yeah, that's absolutely on my list.
And one of the reporters is throwing these environmental questions at Robbo, and he says, the environment in Sydney's not that bad. You should check out the Asiatic Games. They're going to be held later this year, and they're going to end the marathon in the respiratory ward of Bangkok Hospital.
To save money on ambulances.
Yeah, because the smog's so bad.
Yeah. Robbo takes no prisoners, does he?
He's calling on the female reporters by saying, yes, sweetheart. Yeah. That sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right, darling.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Oh, man.
I like the bit where they're kicking around the ideas about how to solve the track problem. A couple of things they talk about are the length of a marathon. He says, how long is a marathon? They get into this conversation about how long a marathon is. And then he says, well, what about, if this marathon's got hills? Because obviously the distance up and down hills is not the same as a flat, straight line distance.
This is what they do
hilarious.
so well. Yeah, and I'll get into it because they like to deconstruct everything. And so John's saying it's not so much a question of time, it's about distance. And not every metre is equal and all these sorts of things, you know.
Oh, so you're going to talk about that?
Oh, a little bit, but more in a highbrow sort of way.
Okay. That's the end of my notes.
Oh, okay. So I've got another clip here, but it comes from this line where Mr. Wilson's going, okay, we could dig up all the cabling and relocate and reset the 100 metres track so it's exactly 100 of your precious metres. Yeah, it's a great line, not only because Mr. Wilson totally trivialises the fact that it's not 100 metres. Oh, you precious metres.
Yep.
And it's his major stuff up, but also, and I'm going to play a clip of his next bit.
But you'll lose the entire first 3 rows right round the entire stadium.
What, the whole way round?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Consider them lost.
No, we can't do that.
No. We've got to do something, Brian. Take them out.
John, we can't do that. We
Take
can't
them-
afford it.
Take them out. Take them out.
John, listen to me. We're talking about 3,000 tickets times 15 days. Think about that. Think about the revenue we're going to lose here. I mean, the media's already measuring us up for a very big necktie over the issue of ticketing anyway. On top of that, I've got the IOC with a hand out for their share, the international federations begging for an increased allotment, and I've got the federal government going through my rubbish bin for what's left. I mean, you know, I was actually hoping at some stage to squeeze a member of the public through a hole in the fence, given that they partake in this rather old-fashioned pastime of actually paying for their tickets.
I'm a humble man, Master Copperfield, but I refuse to be remembered as he who ran the 100 metres at the Sydney Olympics over 94 metres, Brian.
And Brian's really upset because he's going to lose 3 rows of tickets, whereas he put 1,000 tickets times 3 for 15 days, and he's saying, you know, I've already got the IOC on my back for tickets, the federal government are going through my rubbish bin for what's left, and I wanted to squeeze a member of the public through the fence because they actually pay for tickets. And what this does, we might not even consciously realise it, but he actually conjures up images. You can almost see a bloke in a suit from the government going through his bin and a member of the public being pushed through a hole in the fence. And what they do there is they turn these... they conjure up actual images which are funny scenarios just with a tiny, cheeky turn of phrase. And it transforms these conversations that were, they're insightful and they're clever, but ultimately they're pretty boring. And by using these little turns of phrase and conjuring up those images, they make it funny and, I don't know, I'm not phrasing it very well, but they make it more relatable and funny and Australian.
Mm-hmm.
The other one, a similar one, is when Brian suggests the circular 100 metres track.
We could run the 100 metres in a circle.
No, you can't do that.
Yes, you can. You can put a circular 100 in the middle of the track out there.
No, you can't do that.
Yes, you can. I mean, if we can fit in a circular 400, we can fit in a circular 100.
No, you can't have a 100 with a bend in it.
Of course you can. The 200's got a bend in it. I mean, the 400's just one dirty big bend all the way around. Why would someone object to the 100 metres having a bend in it?
Well, they won't run in it.
I mean, there are no rules that said the 100 metres has to be run in a straight line.
They will get dizzy.
No. But it's exciting. I mean, think about this, John. I mean, the problem with the 100 metres at the moment, as I see it, is you know who's going to win because you know who's in front. Now, the 400 metres, you don't know who's in front until they straighten up at the top of the straight. It's fantastic. I mean, the crowd loves it.
If you run the 100 in a circle, Brian, they're not going to straighten up till they get home.
Wouldn't that be a ball terror?
Brian, if the world champion draws the outside lane in your event, the centrifugal force active on him when he comes off the home turn will be bloody enormous. He'll rip his freckle out. He'll be up over here like the bloody sheepdog across the top of the crowd.
Be a ball terror, though.
Yeah, bloody sight worse than that, Brian.
So there, again, they do it because John's response is they'll be going so bloody fast if they're going in a curve on the 100 metres that the centrifugal force will rip his freckle out. And he'll be like a bloody sheepdog landing on top of the audience and all that sort of stuff. And yes. So not only do they deconstruct everything, but they do it in a very Aussie way. Well, let's abandon that, right? And let's get into this other thing, which I've called in my notes the Socratic method.
Yep.
So the way I see John Clark and Brian Dorr is that people have assumptions and they think they have knowledge. And Socrates used to just ask them simple questions from like a bit of perspective. And then through that interrogation, so to speak, he'd find out that people think they know what they're talking about and they don't know what they're talking about.
Yep.
And I see a lot of alignment there with what happens in the games with John Clark and Brian Dorr. So they use the Socratic method to pull a thing apart and they inject Aussie humour into where the gaps now exist after they've pulled it apart.
Or is there an example of that in this episode?
Oh, there's heaps. It's like when John had that whole discussion on what a metre is, and not all metres are equal. And then if you've got the marathon going on in, he said, in Holland or whatever, in the Netherlands, it's all flat. But if you've got a marathon going on in the Andes or something, then it's a very different thing. And he starts talking about how it's not about distance, it's about time. And he just rips apart the assumptions that we all take as a given on the Olympics.
Yep.
And then he'll inject other things with that and just pull it apart with the Socratic method. I don't know, because I don't have time to go into all of this. I just thought it's an observation which I can't fully... something. So have you dealt with Socrates much at all?
No, I haven't read any Socrates, but I've read Plato. I've read The Republic and...
Yeah.
the essays about love.
Mm.
And
So nothing that's going to help us in this particular situation. Oh,
nothing
no.
helpful. Of
I
course
saw
not.
all those books on your bookshelf. I
not.
thought Steve's going to bail me out and help finish my thought on this. Oh, dear.
No, I've got nothing.
Right, okay. All right, well, as mentioned, I haven't expressed my theories and feelings about the series in the way that I'd dearly like to, but I'm going to put it up there anyway and hope for the best, and I'll just say The Games is not only a top-tier example of a mockumentary, but easily a top 3 Australian sitcom, I'd argue. It's down to earth, but highly intelligent, and what I like about this as opposed to some other shows in the same genre is that these are characters you can love, and it's not piercing their pride and showing how unself-aware they are, which is something The Office does brilliantly. But these guys have wins. Whereas when we were watching Utopia, and poor old Tony, you know he's never going to have a win. The system's always going to beat him. And although it is brilliantly insightful and funny and extremely well written, it can wear you down. Whereas in the games, you know there's an end to it.
Yep.
And you know they're going to have wins and they're going to outwit all these forces that are coming in to destroy them. And they do it in a really sort of lackadaisical almost way. And there's hope in the games, which is what I like.
Yep. I think you're right. We've got to cheer the character on. And you do want to see them get a win on the board every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Like in Yes, Minister.
Oh, yes.
My favourite episode's always the ones where somehow the minister manages to turn the tables on Sir Humphrey.
Yeah, and you do love those characters as well, I feel.
I like the bit where you've got the conversation going on back in the office between the guys trying to solve the problem of the track, and then you've got the press conference going at the same time.
Yeah.
And the guys in the office are also watching the press conference on TV because they've paused their meeting or something like that. And they're watching Robbo in action, and there's this Chinese whispers thing that happens, and Robbo pulls himself out of it, and first, what's the lady called?
Gina
turns to the camera and says, "Oh, he's very good." And then you've got John back in the office turning to the camera at the office and saying, "Oh, he's very good." And it's like,
yeah.
This is just the genius, the way they're putting the two shots and the conversations, the camera together at the same time.
Oh, they do it again where John's watching the press conference. He's going, "That's Nagano, isn't it? Gina's got the wrong brochure." And then Gina's standing there. She goes, "That's the wrong brochure. That's Nagano." And she turns to the camera. She goes, "John's really stuffed this up." And on the other end, John's turned to the camera and goes, "Gina's really stuffed this up."
Like they use the format brilliantly.
Oh, jolly good. I
that.
hadn't considered that at all. Well done.
Well, overall, I just think it's in that classic Aussie vein of low-key, sarcastic humour, which, I really love that. Similar to HG and Roy and Utopia and all those shows that those guys have done. So, yeah, that's definitely enjoyable from that point of view.
Oh, good.
It's basically like a bunch of larrikins somehow managed to get themselves the job of organising the games, and they just seem to be winging it and dealing with whatever curveballs get thrown at them completely on the fly. So that was a lot of fun. But then the way they bring it together at the end, where the two storylines cross over with blaming Robbo's assistant back at the office, Kevin
Nara, yeah.
And just the overall premise of 100-metre track being 6 metres too short. It's just an all-time classic. So yes, I'm more than happy to put it in.
Well, I'm very pleased you put it into the Hall of Fame. I reckon it deserves to be there. It is brilliant. And one day we'll get around to some more Australian sitcoms like Mother and Son and various other ones that deserve to be in the Hall of Fame rather than completely risky propositions, and there's many of those. And we'll be back in around a fortnight with another sitcom that, as always, we won't reveal at this point in time.
My choice. Okay. See you later.
Bye. Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.